His adopted children's laughter echoed like glass shattering as they pushed him out. The very kids James Carter had pulled from the edge of ruin, clothed, fed, and nearly bankrupted himself for, now looked at him as if he were nothing more than a problem to get rid of. Lily and Connor, once the fragile souls he'd promised to protect, had grown into young adults with expensive tastes and colder hearts. Their polished friends mocked his weathered hands, his lined face, the life carved into his skin. That bitter evening, after a single protest at their cruel jokes, they shoved him out into the night, slamming the heavy door behind him. He trudged toward a forgotten house he hadn't stepped inside for 15 years, its roof sagging, windows blind with dust. But behind those rotting walls, James would stumble on something hidden, something powerful enough to twist fate and make those same children return, this time on his terms. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It keeps us sharing stories that matter. Stay with us to the end. You won't want to miss what happens. And if this story stirs something in you, leave a comment or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now, let's begin. The sky hung low, a dull grey soaked with rain, as James Carter stepped onto the porch with a battered leather suitcase. The hinges groaned when the door closed halfway behind him, but no one inside moved to help. From the kitchen came a burst of laughter, sharp, careless laughter. Lily and Connor were probably there, leaning against the marble counter he'd once worked double shifts to afford. 15 years earlier, they'd been two frightened silhouettes in the doorway of a shelter. Lily, only 11, had clung to her brother's arm as though it was the last thing keeping her upright. Connor, 9, had stood quiet but alert, eyes darting like a stray's. James had walked in that day with a stack of donated blankets and walked out with 2 fragile lives he swore to defend. He remembered their first winter together, skipping meals so they wouldn't go hungry, patching their torn shoes with duct tape because there wasn't money for new ones. He remembered their small victories, their crayon drawings, crooked report cards waved proudly at him as if they were gold. But those memories felt like another man's life now. Somewhere, his steady devotion had turned into an eyesore. Their glossy friends, people who looked as though they'd stepped straight out of a magazine, whispered behind wine glasses about his dark skin, his faded military jacket, the way he still lived as if the war hadn't ended. He'd overheard it all. The breaking point came 2 nights ago at a dinner party. Connor's influencer friend, reeking of cologne, had cracked a cruel joke about old soldiers and their ghosts. James didn't smile. He spoke in that calm, heavy voice that only men who'd carried real burdens could use. "Don't joke about battles you've never fought." The friend stormed out, wounded pride in his wake. By morning, Lily's words were clipped, almost rehearsed. "You make our friends uncomfortable, James. Maybe it's time you had your own space." He had looked at her for a long, aching moment. She wasn't his by blood, but by a choice he'd made every day for 15 years. That choice had been enough for him, but apparently not for her anymore. On the porch, James adjusted the strap of his suitcase. Behind him, Connor muttered something under his breath, and Lily laughed, a brittle, unfamiliar sound. Across the street, 2 neighbors raked leaves, their voices drifting over like a cold breeze. "Thought they loved that old man," one said. "Love doesn't last when money and pride get in the way," the other replied. James kept his silence. James stepped off the porch, boots crunching against the gravel, his breath a pale mist in the cold. Behind him, the warm lights and polished furniture, the voices that once called him Dad, blurred and shrank with every step. He didn't glance back. Not yet. The bus ride stretched endlessly, the kind where the seats are stiff enough to bruise and the windows turn passing streetlights into blurred streaks. James sat near the back, his suitcase braced between his knees, watching the cityscape dissolve from towers of glass to cracked sidewalks and forgotten corners. When he finally stepped off, the air was damp, tinged with rust and wet leaves. He walked nearly half an hour past shuttered shops, sagging fences and puddles that caught the glow of a crooked street lamp. At the end of a lonely street, the outline of an old house emerged. His house, or what remained of it. The paint had surrendered to a weary grey. Ivy clung to the porch rails like stubborn fingers. A broken shutter flapped faintly in the wind, and the place seemed smaller, as if time had gnawed away its edges. The key still fit, though the swollen door resisted before giving way. Inside, the air was dense with dust. Each step stirred faint motes that drifted lazily through the fractured light, seeping between warped blinds. James set the suitcase down in the front room. The couch was gone, sold long ago, but a faint dent in the carpet marked where it once rested. A lonely folding chair waited in the corner. He unfolded it and sat, listening to the house creak, as if whispering old secrets to itself. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then went quiet. That first night he stretched out on a lumpy mattress in the back room, the springs biting into his shoulders. Rain ticked against the roof like an impatient visitor. Days bled into weeks. James found a rhythm, patching leaks with tar paper, clearing the overgrown yard, trudging to the discount store for bread and instant coffee. He learned where the wind slipped through the walls, stuffing rags into gaps. Sometimes neighbors strolled past, their voices floating through thin glass. "That's the old Carter place. Thought nobody'd come back. Shame, though. House is falling apart." Once, a man in a faded green jacket paused at the fence. "You're that veteran, right? The one who used to run the business?" James nodded, but the man only offered a slow, pitying smile and walked on. At night, James sat by the lone kitchen lamp, hands cradling a chipped mug, staring at the bare walls. Lily's brittle laugh replayed in his mind. Connor's smirk. He tried to push it away, but some memories burn their own candle in the dark. It was a slow descent, no shouting, no tears. Just a man folding into himself, unaware that the house still had something waiting for him, something he'd buried and forgotten. It began with a groan underfoot, not loud, just the weary sound of wood that's carried too many years. James had been fixing a leak in the back room, balancing on a short ladder, hammer in one hand, roofing felt under the other. As he stepped down, a board sank lower than it should. He froze, easing his weight back. Dust swirled through the slanted afternoon light. Kneeling, he traced his fingers along the seam until brittle wood crumbled beneath his touch. He worked the edge loose, and the plank lifted with a sigh. Beneath it yawned a pocket of cool darkness. His hand brushed something solid, a fireproof safe, squat and square, freckles of rust spreading across its metal. The handle felt stiff, as though it had been holding its breath for years. James sat back on his heels, heart thrumming. He remembered now the day he bought it. Her job in '07 had gone well, and he'd picked up the safe on his way home, tucking away a few things for later, except later never came. The safe sat buried, first beneath boxes, then under years, until it slipped clean out of his memory the day he walked away from this house. Dragging it free was no small task. His muscles burned as he hauled the box from its hiding place, letting it drop onto the worn floorboards with a thud that seemed to echo through the room. The next challenge was the key. James rifled through drawers, jars, the old tin where he'd once kept loose change. Nothing. Finally, he fetched the army knife from the bedside table, working the lock with patient, steady pressure until a faint click rewarded him. The door swung open on stiff hinges. Inside lay an oilcloth bundle, and within it a scuffed portable hard drive. Beneath that, a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber band so dry it snapped in his fingers. James spread the papers across the table. Bank statements, share certificates, notes scrawled in his blocky handwriting. One name repeated again and again, the title of a tiny tech firm few had believed in. Back then, they'd been a footnote, just another gamble he'd taken after reading about a piece of software in a trade journal. Then came the moves, the storms of life, and the safe sinking beneath all of it. Now, 15 years later, he slid the drive into a borrowed laptop from the neighbor's teenage son. The machine hummed, flickering to life before spilling a cascade of numbers and stock symbols across the screen. At first they blurred together. Too many digits. He leaned closer, scrolling, heart drumming in his ears. Every share split, every spike, every dividend reinvested, the growth charted in stark, steady lines. And at the bottom, a figure sat quiet but unshakable. 14,100 descended to 600 T. James leaned back, palms flat on the table, drawing in deep, even breaths. The wind pressed against the eaves, and for a moment the house itself felt calmer, like it had been waiting to release this secret. He didn't smile. Not yet. That would come later. For now, it was enough to know the world hadn't drained him dry after all. He wasn't reckless with the discovery. Money, to him, was like a rifle. Something you handled carefully, aiming only when you were sure. Months slipped by as the old house transformed. New shingles gleamed in the sun. Fresh paint softened the mildew scent, and the porch boards, sturdy again, still creaked with the same familiar voice. Inside, his setup stayed humble. A strong armchair, an oak desk, and a wall blanketed in plans for what was next. He founded Homefront, a charity for veterans and forgotten kids. The office was simple. Brick walls, mismatched chairs, coffee strong enough to wake the dead, but it thrummed with purpose. Volunteers streamed in with rolled sleeves and bright eyes, and James was there every morning, rolling up his own sleeves alongside them. Before long, whispers stirred through town. "That's Carter, isn't it? The vet thought he'd lost everything. Guess not. Looks like he's back on his feet." Meanwhile, the polished world his adopted children prized began to splinter. Lily's engagement unraveled in public. Her fiancé, a man with a movie star smile and too much watch glitter, announced over dinner, friends watching, wine glasses poised, that he couldn't handle the baggage her family carried. Someone caught it on video. By sunrise, the clip had spread everywhere, and the comments were merciless. Connor tried to outrun the noise by joining his influencer friends in a glittery crypto scheme that promised instant millions. Instead, it bled his accounts dry, leaving creditors and the threat of lawsuits close behind. The calls stopped. The invites vanished. By the time Lily and Connor stepped through the glass doors of Homefront, they no longer looked like the smug pair who'd laughed on the porch months before. Lily's makeup was neat, but her eyes kept darting as if they wanted to hide. Connor's hoodie hung loose, heavy with everything he couldn't say. They sat across from James at a small round table. The scent of cinnamon drifted in from the bakery down the street. He let the silence sit between them until they fidgeted. "We need help," Lily whispered. Connor nodded once, as though any more might splinter him. Outside, 2 volunteers walked past. "That's them," one murmured. "Crazy how fast things change," the other replied. James laced his fingers together, the way he used to during briefings in another life. His gaze was steady, calm. "You'll get help," he said, voice low and even, "but you'll earn it." The terms came slowly, each one landing like a nail set firm. Full-time work at Homefront, starting at intake and field visits. A stipend, not a salary, until every debt, money and otherwise, was cleared. Handwritten apologies to the people they'd slighted on their way up. 3 months off social media. No glossy redemption reels, just quiet work. They agreed, not with smiles, but with the weary acceptance of people who finally understood what arrogance costs. Over the weeks, the labor reshaped them. Lily learned to stack supply crates, then sat with a teenage girl from the shelter, guiding her through a college application. Connor hauled pallets through cold rain, later kneeling beside a boy to show him how to tie a proper knot. By spring, Homefront's yard pulsed with life. Smoke curling from a grill, laughter rippling across the grass, music low and warm. James leaned against the porch rail, the same one he'd gripped the first night he'd returned. Across the yard, Lily handed a backpack to a young boy who lit up as if it were weightless. Connor laughed, an unguarded, genuine sound, while volunteers teased him about his slow loading pace. At the fence, 2 older neighbors watched. "Carter looks lighter," one said. "Nah," the other replied with a small smile. "He's carrying the same load. Just turned it into part of the frame." James exhaled, slow and easy. He didn't think of revenge, only the road ahead, and the fact that for the first time in a long while they were walking it together. If this story spoke to you, don't just keep scrolling. Tap that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, if you were James, what would you have done?